and this is a 3/16. Now the difference in the lead as it gets bigger, you get more of a channel inside, so it hides more of the glass. It also lets you, if you make a mistake and got a little chip out of your glass or didn't cut it perfectly right, to hide that little bitty mistake. Whereas you get down into this little 1/8 inch, you got to be dead on the money when you cut your piece, because if you have any little way off whatsoever, it's going to show up when you get your panel leaded. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to put a 1/2 inch H channel on the outside. Okay. What I'm going to do is I've already framed my panel in. You put it all the way onto the mark of the line on your outside line. Now when you draw your pattern, you got to realize you're starting on from the outside. You got to have two lines here on the outside. One is for the outside of the lead, and the other one represents where the glass is actually going to touch inside that lead. So today we're going to start. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch. I'm going to take my lead knife, which we sell here also, and I'm going to use this to start. I'm going to mark exactly where my panel ends. We've got this beautiful little saw we sell here for cutting lead and zinc. And all right, now I'm going to take my nails. I'm going to hold this in to where this can't move once I start, because you don't want it to come apart once you start. Now I'm going to do the other side of the bottom. Again, get it flat, nice and straight. Butt it up to your other piece tight and make sure it's up against the panel. And then again, just with your lead knife, go mark where the outside edge is. You want to go all the way to the very end. Again, what we'll do is we'll put our tack in here and hold it. Now I've laid out this one panel today. It's a bevel panel. It's real simple. Anybody that's just starting off, this would be something you really probably would like to tackle first, because it's not complicated. Since we're going to use a 1/4 inch lead on the outside here today, I've went ahead and I've made a 1/4 inch what I call a guide. It's just a little piece that I use and I teach people to use to get to know exactly where this is going to touch. And for the outside edge here, I made a little one of my 1/2 inch H channel. So what we're going to do here, we're going to put in our first piece of glass. Now, you can see this black line all the way around this piece. That's what we use those scissors for, to cut out so it would fit these here. So when you cut your piece of glass, although this is a bevel, you should be able to see when you put it in the black line all the way around it. And that black line, like I say, represents the curve in the middle of the thing. All right, these are lead dikes. You definitely need a pair of these when you do lead. You have your saw, but a lot of times if you're going straight cuts or easy cuts, it's better to just use these. So what I did is I cut this. All right, so I put this in. Now that I want to take my next piece just to see if it fits. And I see my black line all the way around. So now I know this piece is correct. So now I'm going to take my guide and I'm going to put it on my glass. And right here where these two pieces of glass touch, or these pieces of lead touch, I'm going to mark this line, because I'm going to take this line all the way up first in this panel. So I see where I've marked my thing. I take my lead cutters and I just cut the panel, or the lead. All right, what you want to do too as you go on, especially if you get a panel that has a whole lot of pieces in it, you're not going to want this panel to move, because it'll fall apart. You'll be all upset because you have to go back and put it back together again. So we sell these little lead and glass stop blocks that you can take your push pin and just put it in here to hold it so it doesn't move until you get ready to put this long strip of lead on. So we're just going to go up through here. Same thing here. Go ahead with your lead and glass stop blocks just so it doesn't move on you. Now, one thing people have a problem with on these lead nippers is they try to use them backwards. There's a flat side and there's an angled side. If you go to cut this on the angled side, you ended up with almost like a diamond on the end. That's not what you want. So the most thing you need to get to know is learn how to use the tools. So the flat side's always what you want flat. Since this is going to butt up flat here, I want to make sure this is flat. So once again, you just take this and put it in. And again, I always take my next bevel or piece just to make sure it's going to fit. I know I'm correct. Okay, I'm seeing my black line all the way around it here. So I'm just going to take my guide again, put it right here, because I know that's where they're going to intersect. I'm going to take my lead knife and mark exactly where they're going to touch again. I'll just take this flat side, because you want this flat where it's touched the other one, and you just cut it just like that. Now once you get used to the size of your lead, you won't want to use one of these anymore. You'll be like, I don't need that anymore. Well, if this was 3/16, I would also take and make a guide out of my 3/16 lead. It doesn't matter what size lead you use, until you get the feeling of, you know, where it's going to have to be cut, it's best to use a guide, because if it butts up correctly here, chances are you're going to get a very nice soldering joint on your panel. So now we're going to take another piece. Now if your piece was bent up or mangled or something like that, this is when you want to take your lead stretcher and stretch it out. It's easier to straighten it out before you put it in. But this was relatively straight, so I'm just going to take it and pop this out, making sure I make sure none of the pieces move. Just put it on like this. Now here on the outside we're using that 1/2 inch, and this is why I made a 1/2 inch guide, because this is not going to be the 1/4 inch anymore. So you take the 1/2 inch, put it on the black line where it's on the outside, mark it again with your lead knife, exactly where it's going to touch. Okay. Then we want that flat, so we turn this around to the flat side, and we cut it. Now at this point is when you want to go ahead to make sure it doesn't move, and just up against your lead put a couple of your tacks. And then here I'm going to go all the way over now. Now at this point it's kind of critical that you kind of watch to make sure where your lead is, and make sure your heart or your lead, which is the center of it, is actually lining up towards these lines going across through here. You can adjust it at the end when you're done, but it's best to try to keep it lined up as you go, because it's going to make it a lot easier on the end. So now we're going to go with this piece. Okay, once again I see all my black lines. All right, we're going to take a smaller piece because you want to try to conserve lead. Lead is not relatively that cheap. All right, we're going to put this here. Since I'm running this line across this way, I'm going to take my lead guide. I'm going to put it right back on the piece of glass so I know exactly where they're going to touch. And I'm just going to mark it with my lead knife. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and run this piece of lead all the way across. See, I've locked this in so this piece can't move, because it's now stable and not moving until, or anything done to it until we put the outer edge on it. Okay, see how these are lining up already over here? Like I say, it's best to pay attention as you go, but in the end you can take your hammer and your lead knife and twist them back and forth a little bit to get them to line up. All right, so now we're going to take our 1/2 inch guide out here on the outside. Put it on the outside edge black line where it's at, and just mark it where they're going to touch. Okay, so now I've got one piece that I've cut already. I'm going to use as the main body besides bevels, just to give a little water glass to it, to give it a little texture. Okay, I got my piece in. I'm seeing the black line all the way around it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock this in. By now you can see it's really not very difficult to start off to do a small panel like this. Now we're back to our 1/4 inch guide. Right here where it touches again, I'll just mark it. By the way, these are Morton lead and stop blocks we sell here. I'm using on the outside of this panel to hold it in. If you're doing a real big panel, you wouldn't want to use these, because unless you had these really tacked down to a table or screwed down, because you don't want your project to flip on you sometimes, because you put a lot of pressure on these, they will flip out on you. Now one difference when copper foiling and lead, you don't have to solder the whole entire lead part. The only thing we're going to solder here to finish this panel up is where all the joints touch. All the lead touches the other lead. So again, this is your last opportunity to make sure things look like they're lined up. You can use a square to put down. I usually just like to stand back and eyeball it a little bit. See, I can move that just a little bit. Here I can see these two aren't lined up, so I'll take and move this over. And I'll just look at it. But like I say, a lot of times you can use a square. Okay, and I'm just doing some last minute touches. Okay, we have two kinds of solder here we sell. We sell 60-40, and we have more than that, but for this application we have 60-40, we have 50-50. 60-40 melts a little at a lower temperature than the 50-50. This is the kind I like to prefer. I like to use 50-50 when I'm repairing a copper foil piece because it doesn't drip through as much. Next thing we want to do is get our flux. Again, I like the can-filled flux we sell here. Now, while I'm waiting for my soldering iron to get hot, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flux all the joints where they touch. The lead touches together where they're cut, their guide. You always want to make sure you have some sort of form of circulation of air because you don't want to be breathing this. And I have a fan behind me going right here. All right. Just another minute. Okay. One thing too, you got to watch your iron doesn't get too hot because lead will melt. Now see how these are touching? Since they're touching here, it's going to make it a lot easier to solder. Had I had gaps in there, it wouldn't be the end of the world because you can fill that gap with solder. You can also use copper foil in there to fill that gap if you had a big gap. And I like to hide my joints, so I just go back and over this one a little bit once it gets hard. Okay, and the same thing, just go from joint to joint. And when you got these where they come together like that, it's always best, especially like a T where they come four ways, is to hold your iron over the whole joint to where it covers the all four sections coming together at one time. It gives you a nice, pretty solder joint. This piece of lead here, I can see that's a kind of a dirty spot, tarnished a little bit. But there we go, that's good enough. So now, let's unplug our iron. Let's go ahead and pop out all of our pins. And this is what we've just made in about 15 minutes here. So you can see it's not too hard and how pretty this is. When the sun comes through it at different angles, these prisms shine different light in different directions.
Welcome to Glass Crafters.
All right, now that we got this finished, normally you solder the back side, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to leave it like this. And I'm going to go into how you putty the window. I'm going to put on a glove because putty is a little messy. Now this putty is basically boiled linseed oil and whiting. And what whiting is basically, that's this powder here that you're going to use to clean this all back off. This is one of the main ingredients in it. And you can see this is pliable, it's almost like Play-Doh. So what we're going to do here is hold your panel and just go around and you're going to shove this in all the cracks. And shove it into the lead good. And we'll just do half of this panel today, give you the idea. What happens is over like 24 to 48 hours, this will turn into almost like a concrete consistency. And that'll make this panel strong and this glass won't rattle. Especially if you're making this for a panel door, you wouldn't want the glass to rattle because it would rattle every time you close or open the door. So you can kind of get the idea of what I'm doing here. I've shoved it all in the cracks here, so let's go ahead and just pretend I have this whole panel done. So now what you want to do is you don't want to have to try to scrub all this stuff off. One, it's going to be almost impossible to get it off all at one time. And two, this is money right here. You can retain this and put it back in your jar and reuse it again for another day. So I'm going to take my FID, the thing,